All right, let's talk about one of the biggest paradoxes in the entire book world. You have the romance genre. It is a juggernaut. It makes more money and sells more copies than pretty much anything else. And yet, it's probably the most ridiculed genre out there. So what is going on here? How can something be so wildly popular and at the same time get so much hate?
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the mind-boggling numbers behind the romance industry. Then we'll get into the most common criticisms people throw at it. After that, we're going to explore the counter-arguments and try to uncover the real bias behind all the hate. And finally, we'll talk about why this whole debate actually matters.
So yeah, let's start with the facts, because the success of romance is not some new trend. It is a long-standing, undeniable force in the market. Get this, in recent years, the romance genre has been pulling in about $1.44 billion in revenue a year. That isn't some tiny niche market, that is an absolute powerhouse.
And if you look at the US fiction market as a whole, romance makes up roughly 30% of all sales. Think about that for a second. It's the single most popular genre out there, outselling pretty much everything else.
So why do so many people love these stories? Well, a huge part of it is just pure escapism. I mean, in a modern dating world that's filled with confusing situationships and ghosting, romance novels offer a place where love is taken seriously. They give people a sense of hope, and now with the explosion of BookTok, they've created these huge, powerful online communities.
Okay, so it's massively popular, but the genre faces this constant barrage of criticism. Let's actually dig into the specific arguments people use to just dismiss it.
Oof, this quote right here really says it all. It captures that super dismissive, condescending tone you hear all the time. The criticism often isn't just about the books themselves, it's a personal jab at the readers, basically saying their enjoyment is a sign of desperation or that they're just not sophisticated.
And these dismissals pretty much boil down to four main gripes. First, that romance sets unrealistic expectations for love. Second, that it's just trashy and isn't real literature. Third, that it's just smut. And fourth, that it's all way too predictable and formulaic.
All right, so those are the main attacks. Now let's flip the script and look at how the fans and the authors of the genre push back.
Let's tackle that first big one, the idea that romance novels are basically poisoning our real-world relationships. Is there really any truth to that?
Well, the counter-argument is pretty simple. Readers are smart. They know the difference between a fictional story and real life. And actually, a lot of these books can be really beneficial. They often model things like healthy communication, consent, and emotional vulnerability. They offer a safe space to think about relationships. And, they provide a little hope that love is still possible.
Okay, let's move on to the next one, this whole debate about literary merit. This is the argument that romance is inherently shallow, a guilty pleasure at best, but it's definitely not serious, capital L, literature. But this argument kind of falls apart when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. I mean, some of the most celebrated books ever written are, at their very core, romance novels. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet? It's a romance. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice? Absolutely a romance. So if we call those classics, it feels a little strange to turn around and dismiss a modern genre for doing the exact same thing.
And that brings us to point number 3, which has gotten so much attention lately, mostly because of social media. It's the idea that the entire vast romance genre can just be boiled down to its steamiest scenes. Yeah, this is just a massive oversimplification. Sure, BookTok loves to highlight the spicy moments, but the genre is incredibly diverse. Tons of romance novels are called closed door, meaning there are no explicit scenes at all. And even in the books that do have them, those scenes are almost always the payoff for a long emotional journey. The real focus is on the character's connection, not just the physical stuff. And this leads us to the last big criticism, that romance is just too formulaic. You know the drill. Two people meet, they face some kind of obstacle, they fall in love, the end. If you've read one, you've read them all, right? Well, let's be real. Nearly every popular genre has a formula. In a murder mystery, the detective is going to solve the case. In a superhero movie, the hero is going to save the world. We don't watch those things because we're shocked by the ending. We watch for the journey. And it's the exact same with romance. It's all about how the characters get to their happy ending.
So if all these common arguments against romance are pretty shaky, you have to wonder, maybe the hate isn't really about the books at all. Maybe it's coming from somewhere else entirely. And this gets us to the real heart of the issue.
Here's the thing. A lot of the criticism aimed at romance seems to fit into this much bigger,
much older cultural pattern of just devaluing and dismissing things that are primarily made by women, for women, and about women's experiences.
And this is where the double standard becomes so obvious, it's almost painful. Look at these two common formulas. 1. A story about two people finding love is often marketed to women and gets labeled as predictable and shallow. The other, about a guy getting powers to save the world, is often marketed to men and gets praised as imaginative and complex, even though it's just as formulaic. The critique isn't really about the structure, is it? It's about who it's for.
Look, this isn't just some silly argument about books. This kind of cultural bias, this genre shaming, it has real-world consequences for everyone. First off, it creates shame. When something is constantly mocked, the people who love it, who are mostly women and girls, can start to feel like their interests are embarrassing or not serious. But it also harms men. By framing stories about love and emotional vulnerability as girly or unimportant, it reinforces this really toxic idea that men shouldn't be interested in those things, which just limits their own emotional expression.
So the verdict is pretty clear. The genre itself isn't trashy, but a lot of the criticism, it's often deeply unfair, and it seems to be based less on literary quality and more on a bias against its audience.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. The romance genre is a huge example of this, but it's not the only one. It really makes you ask, what other things, what music, what movies, what hobbies do we write off as silly or unserious, not because of their actual quality, but simply because of the kind of people who love them?